Recorded. Thank you for joining us today. My name is April Witteveen. I am the Director of Library Services at Crook County Library, where it is beautiful and sunny in Prineville today. The Oregon Library Association is strongly committed to diversity, equity, and the free expression of ideas, as expressed in the American Library Association's Statement of Appropriate Conduct at ALA conferences. Please read the OLA Community Agreement on the OLA conference site in Whova under the Conduct link found in the left-hand navigational column. If you have any questions or feedback about conference conduct, please contact OLA President Kate Lasky at olapresident@olaweb.org. Just a little bit of housekeeping. By this point in our conference, I'm sure many of you are familiar with these instructions, but just as a reminder, everyone's microphones and cameras will be muted during the presentation in order to preserve bandwidth and focus attention on our presenters. There will be some other opportunities for interaction today, so stay tuned to the slides to see what our presenters are looking for today. If time allows, we will do a question and answer at the end of the program, so please drop your questions in the Q&A box in Whova. If you join this presentation just through Zoom, the Zoom chat is disabled, so all of the interactions for chat and question and answer will be done via Whova. Grace is our Whova moderator and technical assistant for this session, so she will be prepared to handle any tech problems as they arise, as well as manage our questions and answers. If there's not enough time today to cover all of the questions that come in, the presenters will have the opportunity to go back into the program session Q&A in Whova and respond later. You as attendees can monitor questions submitted and vote on the ones you would like to have answered by upvoting them with a thumbs up. This will allow Grace as our Whova moderator to determine which questions come first. As noted, if you have trouble with technology today, put your question in Whova chat and Grace will do her best to help out. And at the end of the session, please take time to rate the session, which you will see on the delivery page and can be found on the session entry in the agenda. Without further ado, I am excited to host Inclusive Pedagogy for Library Instruction, Reading Apprenticeship Metacognitive Strategies, possibly the conference session with the longest title. I am proud to introduce Pam Kessinger, librarian at Portland Community College, and Colleen Sanders. All right, take it away.
Thank you. So welcome to our session, folks. We're really glad to have you join us here. I'm Colleen, this is Pam. The outcomes for the session will that hopefully be, you will leave being able to describe the reading apprenticeship or RA framework and its routines, adapt the RA routines to your library instruction in all modalities and formats, connect to the RA and the ACRL frameworks to enrich your instruction and assessment. And by ACRL framework, for those who don't live and breathe ACRL, it's the framework for information literacy for higher education. It's a set of 6 core concepts for information literacy practice. And identify opportunities to partner with disciplinary faculty or other teaching partners at your institution.
So the structure today is that we'll start with basics on how reading apprenticeship works. We'll look at how RA practices and theories can be incorporated into one-shots and at the reference desk, how it would work in an online course, and we'll do a short learning experience to spark your thinking about novice researchers and your own researcher identity, something like your reader identity. We'll have a couple of ways for engagement during this presentation. Put questions and upvote them on the Q&A. We'll use chat later for responses to a worksheet, which you'll be guided to be able to make a copy of it for yourself. And the links for our materials are in our description. So feel free to take a look at those there. And we'll also link to a materials folder with other items.
So when you entered the Whova room, we had a poll saying metacognition is for folks who wanted to give us some feedback on how you're conceptualizing metacognition currently. And I'm looking at the responses. A lot of you said, I'd say about half said thinking about thinking, and that's a really core kind of common definition in the literature. There's some folks asked questions, some looked it up. I see hyper engaged pondering, very nice. Reflection at its best, self-regulation. So I would say taking all those as a lump sum, thinking about thinking, reflecting, and then add with the purpose of accomplishing some goal. So I'm reflecting on how I'm thinking, I'm noticing how I'm reading or engaging, and then I make a correction or a modification to continue my progress towards the goal. That's kind of what we're working on in this presentation. So we'll start with an RA 101, the basics, what it is, who it serves, how it works, and why it matters. So Reading Apprenticeship was founded by West Ed, which is an educational research nonprofit in California. In the 1990s is when it began, and then through to the early 2000s, they received large federal grants, so National Science Foundation, Department of Education, statistically significant studies to refine the framework and then disseminate it, mostly in middle school and high school classrooms, and recently it is being adopted and practiced in community colleges. So its goal is, as it says, improving academic literacy. So what does that mean? It's college success skills, reading skills, engaging with complex texts, writing, like our core competencies. So the definition I'll offer for this presentation is twofold. One is subject area knowledge, right? So disciplinary knowledge. And then the second is our habits of mind, our practices. To use ACRL framework language, knowledge, practices, and dispositions. So what's really key in particular about Reading Apprenticeship is that it does this instruction of core competencies within a subject area course. So instead of routing students to remedial or developmental ed sequences, an instructor builds a Reading Apprenticeship classroom in the biology course, in the composition, in the psychology course. Of course, it's used in developmental ed classrooms too. It's really particularly useful for new learners. Think undergraduates, community college students, first years, and it's research-based, shows it increases learning and engagement for those learners who are historically and currently underserved by our traditional educational practices. The core text might be in your library collection. It's in a lot of the big ebook packages. It's Reading for Understanding, published in 2012. And it's important to note that this framework is copyrighted. So when you're doing your lesson plans and making your materials, especially if you think open pedagogy, keep that in mind.
So the Reading Apprenticeship framework is situated within the context of extensive reading and metacognitive conversation for yourself, and then between yourself and others, between self and texts, and between texts. It focuses on 4 dimensions: social, personal, cognitive, and knowledge. Each dimension contains several goals for meaning making, metacognitive practice, and developing identities for reading. And when you hear reading in the RA framework, think reading for research. Routines have been designed for each dimension, but are generally interchangeable because the emphasis is on becoming able to identify what you know and how you know it through metacognition, or as ACRL defines it, becoming critically self-reflective.
The RA framework has its framework and its research base and its theory, and then it has the routines. And the routines are the things that you can look at and think, oh, I can adapt this into a one-shot lesson plan. It's the easily implementable, low-hanging fruit of the RA structure, although we'd caution with metacognitive practice, like a plug-and-play pedagogy isn't going to give the impact or the integration or that kind of wraparound instructional approach. Then if you do spend some time with the theory and integrating it into your practice more widely than just, a worksheet in class. But we're going to explore a few routines briefly here. So routines, of course, being things that we practice more than once. So they're activities for metacognitive practice with an emphasis on that practice because you introduce these into the course or into the one shot and then they're repeated. So one by one, we'll just go through on this slide and I will give you a brief annotation of a few major ones. So first there's modeling. This is probably something you're already doing in one-shots where you demonstrate how you read or search. A think aloud. This is a common one that we'll practice in this presentation where you're explaining your internal thought process. You're making it explicit what's going on in your mind so learners can appropriate it for themselves. That's the apprenticeship piece of this. Talking to the text, so this is annotation, students writing on a text, although going beyond writing ideas or disciplinary notes and reacting to the text and noting their own reading habits. An evidence interpretation log, if you've opened the worksheet that's listed in our session description, you have an example of that in front of you. It's a 2-column kind of research log, which we'll explore in more depth later. By the way, that's there so you can be taking notes as we talk if it's of interest to you. The next is a personal reading history, where students essentially write a brief autoethnography of their development as a reader or as a researcher. A reading strategies list, which is a student generated kind of crowdsourced collection from their practice, where they articulate strategies that worked for them when they're reading a scholarly article or navigating a database, whatever your outcome is. A golden lines activity, which is extracting valid text or evidence from a text. A 25-word summary, which of course is just a brief demonstration of comprehension by pulling out the main ideas. A metacognitive bookmark, which is an interesting one. It can be a physical bookmark with metacognitive stems, as in I predict, I visualize, I question, I wondered, that students can have side by side with their text to help them engage with. Obviously, you can do a digital version as well. There's an example in our materials folder. And the last one is a graphic organizer, where, of course, we help students visualize ideas. And our next slide is one.
So Zoe Fisher has done inspiring work in the field of metacognition, RA, and information literacy. This is her graphic. It captures the essence of using RA as a methodology for teaching information literacy. We look at reader research identity in the personal dimension first, where students bring their life experiences and understandings to start, and then build and change strategies over time. A key component in this process is the idea of moving from novice to expert across learning experiences and starting that process over in any new situation. In the social dimension, the student learning space really opens up for inclusive pedagogies, where students openly share their confusions and problem solving. Practices that ensure safety empower students to share. Seeing the connection between literacy and power is the ultimate goal of this dimension, as students begin to see their role as information producers. Here's perhaps a clearer view with the goals of the dimensions most key for information literacy highlighted. Notice that metacognitive conversation touches all dimensions, and so is a central component of reading apprenticeship. For the other dimensions, cognitive and knowledge building, these two are closely aligned, it feels like. The goals of monitoring comprehension and problem solving are essential to gaining new knowledge. An additional aspect of the knowledge building dimension is that understandings will change with different disciplines and areas of study.
And Pam and I had a great conversation while we were making this on that slide, because we were negotiating whether it should be metacognition at the center or metacognitive conversation, because those are two different things, right? And depending on the limitations of the instruction format you're working in, that might be something you think about as well, whether it's internal metacognition or externalized conversation. When I think about RA's roles in my information literacy instruction, I think of it on two levels. The first is curriculum, right? So what we teach. And what I mean by this is that librarians should consider including reading strategies in supports within our information literacy instruction. To pull a quote from our friend Zoe Fisher, research problems are reading problems, especially at the early learner level. We focus on finding and evaluating and citing, but if students can't comprehend what they read, have we fully served them? And one of the articles linked in the session description is a great piece from ACRL 2015 on that subject, addressing reading skills. The second piece is through pedagogy. So using the RA framework and the routines to teach our information literacy concepts. When I read reading apprenticeship literature, I read it in two ways at once. I see what's on the page and I see reading apprenticeship, but in my mind, I'm also thinking, replacing the word reading with research or information literacy, and it still holds. It speaks straight to what I'm doing in the class or want to be doing. So teaching information literacy through reading apprenticeship.
Whoops, did I skip one?
I don't think so.
Oh, there it is. Okay. So when you overlay the integrated abilities of the ACRL framework on for information literacy onto the center of the RA framework, it looks pretty clear that the two are intertwined. So if you put, so here are some selective knowledge practices or dispositions from the framework for information literacy fitted into the RA dimensions. RA encourages students to tolerate ambiguity, invite thinking, make connections, document, and extend. Metacognition in both RA and information literacy go beyond knowing when you're thinking. It also includes self-regulation to make sense of text, recognize when there is something you need to learn before proceeding further, identifying problems in thinking processes, and monitoring comprehension and progress towards improving thinking.
And our slide deck does contain 6 slides that are muted for this presentation, but it's in the materials folder where we do a more extended crosswalk between the two frameworks. And if that inspires anybody to reach out down the line, I think that that's a really interesting research area going forward. But for now, we're going to offer an exercise for you all to do individually at your computers. If you open up the worksheet, it's linked in the description. We'll go to section 1. And the purpose of this is to do a reading apprenticeship routine, the personal reading history, in this case, expertise, and get into that metacognitive mindset. So for 5 minutes, I'll time you and give you a 1-minute warning. Think back to a time in your career when you had to develop new expertise. As librarians, this feels like a weekly, if not daily basis. How did it feel? What steps did you take? Where did you struggle? And how did you problem solve? And if you would, share some takeaways in chat. That'd be great. I will time you now. Or 1 minute warning if folks are wrapping up their personal free writes. If you care to share any takeaways in chat, you are more than welcome.
And by the way, if you came in later, the link to this worksheet is in the session description.
Meredith has shared about teaching, and I agree. I had that same experience. In fact, I think the person who supervised me while I did my first instruction session is in this room, and I hope she never talks. I was sharing about my experience learning about copyright, fair use, and open licenses. That was something, and is still something that I had to go on a high learning curve and keep myself there to stay current. Okay, well, we'll go ahead and keep moving. But that worksheet's there for you to do on your own time if it interests you, and feel free to share anytime in chat.
Could I share just one comment?
I hope you do.
Well, I started taking notes on the first time that I was going to teach a credit course, not that long ago. And so it brought out so many emotions of the fear and the nervousness and the desire for perfection and the wow, I don't know what I'm doing. And so reflecting on that, it's helped me kind of appreciate the point at which I've come to now, but that it was, a good year or longer process to really feel like I had my feet on the ground for something like that. Okay, I'll move to the next slide.
Thanks. So talking about metacognition as inclusive pedagogy, the title of this in connection to the conference theme, we say this knowing that higher ed was built for and still predominantly benefits a small segment of the population, right? So many of us are striving to audit our teaching practices for legacy behaviors, content, practices that are exclusive. I see reading apprenticeship as a vehicle for making identity welcome and relevant and supportive of a learning experience. It gives students autonomy in the classroom, flexibility, and really wraparound learning supports. And metacognition is a skill, almost the ultimate transfer skill that will serve them well beyond a single classroom experience. Reading apprenticeship is connectivist, it is constructivist. You're the facilitator, you're the guide on the side, and you're helping these students co-create their learning experience in a way that is specific to that group of individuals. It's the opposite of knowledge transmission, right? So by inviting narrative and students' experience, not their product, not their outcomes, but their experience of learning, the struggles, the questions, the connections, you're making space for them to grow an actually authentic sense of belonging, which, these things have to be done with care and preparation, right? But pedagogically, it's inclusive, especially for our vulnerable learners who may struggle in the college environment, doubt whether they can achieve, whether they belong. Metacognition could be a survival or persistence strategy because it can help you manage your cognitive load and know when you're at too much, when you're not learning anymore, when you need a break, practice self-care, when you need to reach out for help. Of course, it supports the representation of diverse perspectives and approaches at students' discretion, right? You're not extracting things from them. And it helps new learners articulate why they want to be in this field, right? Build their disciplinary thinking and identity. The Reading Apprenticeship research base does have empirical evidence showing gains in engagement and learning for students with low academic literacy, these students who might be funneled into remedial course sequences. And there's data to show that funnel into the remedial course sequences are often inaccurate by placement tests. They tend to funnel more low-income first-gen or ethnic minority students into these sequences, which can sometimes take time and money and have stigma, and students don't make it into their credit-bearing sequences to complete their degrees. So remembering that RA is teaching academic literacy within those subject area courses, I see it as structurally inclusive and also an opportunity for librarians to show instructional leadership in partnering um, with accelerated learning classrooms, remedial classrooms, and subject area courses.
Yeah, good. Okay. So it's evident that RA is a collection of already known practices and strategies, but the value is in how it draws together in a cohesive whole all the right things from transparent design, learning theory, social justice, open pedagogy, asset-based and constructivist pedagogies. As such, it upends faculty and student expectations for how teachers and teaching librarians are supposed to be. For faculty, the responsibility for extending student reading is upon them. They help students surface difficulties with texts and draw students out to find and share their unique problem-solving strategies. Faculty also position themselves authentically as learners. When faced with text, they too find it difficult. Students expecting information transfer in a passive fashion may be surprised, and their quest for finding efficiencies rather than understanding is less likely to be fulfilled. RA requires modeling thinking, questioning, and metacognitive processes, and revealing authentically reading and research identities. So can all of this be accomplished in a 50-minute face-to-face library instruction session? That's unlikely, but some of it can, and especially in close collaboration with a content instructor. So I'll talk a little bit about now how I use my understanding of RA principles to inform my instruction. Key RA principles I use routinely for all kinds of classes would be these. I use brainstorming to connect to prior knowledge that students have and their interests, and to tap into creative thought. Inviting confusion for all, including myself, and model metacognition of my decision-making, problem solving, and insights. I usually have a note taker of some sort available for students that will have prompting questions and space for gathering ideas and words. If more time is available, I collaborate with the instructor, and we might use routines like silent sustained reading and a golden line, or something like give one, get one. The reference desk, working one-on-one with students, I emphasize the RA frames of the personal and the cognitive, and work to surface the students' thinking. I ask how they connect to a topic and what they already know about it. I might take notes on what I observe the students say that they are thinking, and as I point out alternative search terms or new ideas, I add those. Inviting confusion changes the conversation from finding and selecting sources with matching terms to finding information which can inform the student about something they are interested in and disrupt that transactional approach they may want. I have students free write about their topics and what their connections to the topics could be. This can strengthen their interest and surfaces how they are thinking about a topic. I use free writes with prompts and small group work for students to share with each other ideas for narrowing topics, alternative search terms, and ideas. Reading and information literacy domains will be different in each discipline. What is transferable is the idea that this is an ongoing learning process. There are challenges. Students often underestimate the value of time spent for reflecting on their prior knowledge or gaining background information. The longer it takes me to model these processes, the more the students can grow impatient. Time for free writes and small group work can appear to them to be extra or irrelevant if they or their faculty are unfamiliar with the RA approach. Faculty may interrupt me to make sure that what they expect for the library instruction session is covered. With RA-informed faculty, I have more leeway to slow a bit, to note my thinking, note my metacognitive moves, and admit when I do not know something. I might have students Google a word or a concept that shows in a search that I'm not familiar with. RA-informed faculty will often summarize a move I've made evident or discuss my thinking, how it's supporting inquiry. And I do try to plan in advance and discuss the activities and outcomes I plan with the faculty that I'll be working with. Now, authentic not knowing is a valuable demonstration of inquiry as a process, but making yourself vulnerable can be intimidating. And from the student view, if they appear hesitant to my questions and seem to think that I'm questioning their choices, I would try to think in terms of saying something like, I'm interested in what you need to know next. I first heard about RA from reading instructors and got training back in 2012. And from that point on, I've been collaborating with them. I think to learn about teaching, you have to observe teachers and have forthright conversations with them. So there's a lot that I've internalized. I've just covered the most important strategies, I think, just to summarize. But in these conversations, you can gain a support network. So if you can find someone to collaborate with or begin a community of practice, that will benefit the process greatly. And here, Colleen will give some examples from her online class.
Yes, thank you. Now that I am unmuted. I, on the other hand, have only come to Reading Apprenticeship less than 2 years ago, and I will be talking about how I applied it over 2 quarters in a credit-bearing course. This is the subject of my capstone for my Master of Education for Instructional Design. So if you are interested, there is a paper linked in the session description for the deep dive with the literature review and the report of the action research process. But for the sake of this presentation, I am only going to focus on the unit of instruction that I created with Reading Apprenticeship. And it's a 7-week series of Canvas or learning management system modules. I don't have time in this presentation to show you 7 weeks of content. So if you do want access to them, just let me know via email. But I will show you a few assignments that exemplify the Reading Apprenticeship practice. Going forward, yeah. So the instructional problem in the unit that I set out to solve is simply, and probably familiar to most, that students struggle to comprehend and use scholarly articles in research projects. I'm sure many of us have experience at the reference desk, working students through even, reading a results list and then maybe seeing their first article and the look on the face, right? Or the student who comes to the ref desk asking for sources for the bibliography now that they're done with the paper. Or maybe you've partnered with subject area faculty to do assessment and you've done an analysis of citations and you see that, sure, maybe they're using scholarly sources, but the faculty member who grades the paper says, no, they're not integrated, the sources are cherry picked, the quotes aren't synthesized. So you see that there's not understanding. And the unit that I'll be touring you through was piloted and taught at Skagit Valley College in the state of Washington, just south of Bellingham there, within the context of a library research course, so a 5-credit library 201 from fall 2020 and winter 2021 quarters, so all during COVID. it's important to note that I designed this unit to be piloted and refined and then offered at scale to the college for any course in any program that has information literacy outcomes, because it would enable us not only to teach at scale, but to have assessment data as well. So that was the vision behind it. The structure of the unit, outcomes. Always start with your outcomes. They're twofold. One, identify the purposes and characteristics of scholarly research articles. So this is that content area knowledge of our academic literacy definition. The second is to demonstrate reading comprehension of scholarly research articles. And this was a little bit out of my wheelhouse in terms of my information literacy background. So it was really fun to build this, and there's a lot of potential going forward. But that's the kind of habits of mind as well as content area knowledge. The structure, yes, it is bookended, start and finish by 2 separate post tests. So a metacognitive survey, which was a qualitative instrument. I searched the literature and didn't find a great metacognitive assessment placeholder for the wonderful folks from Alago who developed it and launched it like 2 weeks after I published my capstone. But I did wind up using some prompts that I found from Portland Community College Library that they had developed in a few different domains. So that was that piece. Students do it before the unit, and at the end we measure for difference. And then a pre-test, post-test, which was a Canvas quiz for content area knowledge. Then, of course, in the center, the learning activities, we have readings, which are varied between OER, videos, infographics, and examples. And then because it's online, asynchronous, folks hop out after doing their readings into a Padlet engagement kind of learning check to have a feedback loop. I have process-based assignments. There is no summative assessment that I just did in Google Docs to keep it simple. And we had video discussions as opposed to text-based discussion boards using Microsoft Flipgrid, and 1 LMS quiz. And as I give you a tour of it, we're only going to look at a couple pieces for time, but the considerations on this particular iteration of this unit, the course context, of course, this is a brand new class, Library 201, and it was an elective, so low enrollment. The class itself, we had 3 learners in fall and 2 learners in winter, which makes learner-learner interaction and engagement difficult, especially when we're talking about metacognitive conversation. My learners were new to community college. They were online during COVID, so it was involuntary, and we were under significant environmental stress. Folks were working, some were in sports, and they had diverging academic paths. So there's a good mix, which is pretty typical for a community college at least. And from a technology perspective, we were trying to keep it low bandwidth to be inclusive of folks who are on the lower end of the digital divide. And I used really common platforms as opposed to some of the maybe fancier ones like Hypothesis that I'm excited to try, but I didn't want to have a learning curve on the technology so students could focus on the course itself. So with all that said, let's take a look. The first thing we'll look at here is a note taker assignment that I created. And it's a Google Doc, and it's spread across 2 slides because it wouldn't fit, so you could read it in this Whova window. But students make a copy of this and they complete it while reading their research articles from library databases. So it's a process-based assignment. We start out with citation information.
Oops, sorry.
I'm just going to go through it line by line. Thank you.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. So yeah, we look at, elements like author, title, date, the format, what the journal is, permalink, kind of the basic aspects of evaluation and saving sources. And the next piece is that evidence interpretation note taker we talked about. You have an example on your worksheet. I really love this tool, a double column research log, because it gets students in the practice of extracting evidence verbatim from the text and really kind of honoring that, letting that sit as it is. And then there's space for all their reactions to it. So that's making connections, that's asking questions. Sometimes you get really emotional responses, like you'd see anger or celebration crop up. And because it's a Google Doc, it's expandable. They could do as many as they want. There was no minimum or maximum requirements. And over time, because this is iterative, right? These are routines. students accumulate these for all of their articles, and these documents become reference points when they go back to review their research and make connections. And over time, the interpretations did start showing connections laterally amongst texts. So it was a successful assignment. The second or third piece is that 25-word summary. So this is practicing summarizing the purpose of the article. And I tell students, pretend we're having coffee or tea. How would you explain it to someone just off the cuff to get that down? Again, a reference point for later when they can't remember what their articles are about. The next piece is golden lines. So that's where they get to pick and save those gorgeous, perfect quotes that they want in their research paper. And then the next page is 1 minute reflection. So the 3 most important points builds off the summary and has students break down the main ideas that they want to save. So they're relating what they read, they're remembering it, they're recalling it, and they're connecting it to their topic. The next piece is questions. So what don't you understand, but what does this make you wonder? This is the idea of sparking curiosity, expanding the topic, looking for sub-threads, making connections. Then the next one I really loved, and students were quite candid here. Which parts are confusing? What don't you understand? And this is an example where I shared with them, when I read something, I'll walk away with the thing that resonated most and the thing I didn't understand. Those are the 2 kind of things that stick with me because it is uncomfortable to not understand something. And that part is where they reach out for help, where they seek tutoring or assistance from the librarian or their faculty member, or where they seek more information. So building a deeper information need. The final piece, how hard was it to comprehend, was something I made up to get some feedback for how students were feeling and doing with their scholarly articles. We don't really have data on our students' reading levels, and I wanted to get a sense of how hard they were struggling or whether this was easy for them. The next piece you'll see, for those who've been attending the Transparency in Learning and Teaching workshops, I do that on all of my assignment. It's basically an assignment design framework that helps students really clearly understand why they're doing what they're doing, how they're supposed to do it, and then how they're graded. My dog has started snoring, so FYI. So I'll start with a purpose, right? How does this connect to your real life? How does this connect to the course outcomes? How are you going to use this going forward? The tasks lay out exactly what you need to do to complete it. And then the thing about TILT that I really love is the criteria. We are teaching students as they go into every assignment how to succeed in assignment by thinking first about why and then what we're looking for. So they can learn how to use a rubric and learn that kind of basic academic capital that they can take to different courses and earn the grade they want with using, sorry, my dog is barking and it's just distracting me. And then finally, I give them an example at the end. Okay, next slide.
Oops.
So this next one is another note taker Google Doc, and you'll notice, I guess I didn't include the title. This one is for reference sources. I guess you can see on the databases, there's Credo and Britannica. When you embed in a subject area faculty's course, you're partnering with them. I don't have this concrete content that I plunk into your course and there's hard lines in between my stuff and your stuff. There's a blend, right? There's an overlap and an integration. And I think that's what you want, you know, when you can not always tell where the IL stuff starts and the other stuff ends. And this is an example of this. Like, reading reference sources isn't necessarily fulfilling my exact outcomes, but they had this similar, you know, activity in the course, and the faculty member loved the note taker framework, so I adapted it for reference sources. So they go through and get articles on their topic and then respond to STEM prompts on the left-hand column that get them thinking not just about content, but about the format they're reading it in and authority and how they respond to it. And the next half of this assignment goes to Wikipedia. It's fun when you teach with faculty who, you know, ban Wikipedia and then bring out this assignment because, you know, we know our students are using it, and it's whether they use it to their advantage in a great effect, or whether they use it and hide it. And then I just feel like it's more transparent and authentic to teach how to use this tool well. So they do the same thing in Wikipedia, but the questions focus more on the format and authority and whose voices are represented and what sources do they draw on. And if you had more emotional reactions to the content in one or the other, and where that might bring in conversations around bias and perspective. So got really interesting responses on this one. The faculty member was quite pleased with it. So that's great feedback for me. Last one for me, this is an example of the reading strategies list. So often this is I've seen in previous courses, a Google Doc where every week students do their readings and come up with some awesome new strategy. They noticed they were doing something while they read, and they noticed they were doing it, and then they shared it with the class. And the end result is this crowdsourced list of handy tips and tricks and heuristics and success strategies for getting through dense academic texts. So I took that idea and turned it into a video discussion. So folks, log into our Flipgrid, and this is private, it's not publicly viewable. Obviously, I've scrubbed it of student data, and they click record a response, and I encourage them to just do it off the cuff or take notes and do it formally if you like, whatever suits you, and answer the prompts to get a little bit of engagement. Of course, with 3 students and 2 faculty members, there's a limit on that, but Flipgrid's nice. It has the option to turn off your video and just do audio if folks don't want to be on screen, or also just do text. And it was a break from a very text-heavy course. Although I will say some students did still struggle getting onto this platform. So thinking about, every time we adopt a new technology, you run the risk of adding a new barrier to someone in the course. So with all that said, the last thing I'll share is another slide from our dear friend Zoe Fisher. This is in one of their presentations linked on their website about RA and online classrooms. You start the conversation, like Pam was saying, you set those expectations for how this classroom is going to be a bit different from what you've probably seen before. You model the routines, you show them what it looks like so they, as novices, can witness it and internalize it and practice it. You use the routines multiple times. You as the facilitator are calling out connections for folks and naming things they're doing to up that metacognitive awareness and just focusing on process. It's okay for it to be a bit of a mess and for it to be imperfect, as long as you're talking about it and transforming that learning.
Okay. So at this point, I want to bring attention to the information literacy reflection tool. Make sure that everybody has heard about that. You can find it at ilreflection.org. And shout out to the ILRT team. Awesome work. This tool aligns with knowledge practices and dispositions of the information literacy frames with 57 statements done in novice-friendly language, selected and edited for clarity and leveling. Item sets have related statements. The statements have validity and reliability in relation to each other, not really as standalone items. It's not for a grade, not to find deficiencies, but done right, the ILRT can show students their changes in over time in how they reflect on their own understanding of the threshold concept of information literacy. It's used for productive self-reflection, where students identify the knowledge and skills they bring to learning, and it makes evident the complexity of information literacy. Librarians can use it to show where their interventions can have an effect. So take a look at that. And here we'd like to show you a video of a Think Aloud. And see if this loads up.
Yeah, this is a video Pam made to demonstrate how you would do this in a one-shot database search. And as we go, if you can just call out, if you note her metacognitive moves in the chat, things you notice she's doing that support the things we've talked about here.
So you'll notice I start with a brainstorm in this video, and I do that to engage thinking and engage interest, connections to a topic. So let me go ahead and start this. So here's a photo of a candy darter. I came across this as I was looking for something else. It had a link to the Fish and Wildlife Service, and so I picked up some basic facts. It lives in Virginia, West Virginia only. It recently was put on the endangered species list. I've got the genus and species name. Wikipedia pointed out that the decline is probably due to human activity. So I did a quick brainstorm free write. I put down my ideas about this. I'm interested because the fish appears very beautiful to me. I do like to go freshwater fishing, but I have never seen a fish like this before. I'm interested in the fact of it being endangered. I'm wondering what's going on with protection or recovery. I think part of the process of that would be looking at genetics, to differentiate from other species of the darters, and what the water or living conditions would be, or competitive species. So I'm going to do a quick search in the biological science database, the context of which I thought would include, specific kinds of fish. With a quick search of candy darter, I only got 15 results, and that does concern me. I'm wondering if after this I may have to search elsewhere to find additional sources. But when I look at a list of results, the first thing I do is look for my phrase down through the list. And so it's appearing, now there's some that are just darter without the full phrase, but several of these do have that phrase. So that's initially a good start. I'm seeing they're all available in full text. I am seeing fairly current dates, 2018 on this one, for example. And let's go back to the top. The first result is a 2019, maybe about 10 pages. That's pretty good. Genetic swamping and possible species collapse. So genetic swamping is interesting to me as a concept. I don't know what introgression means, so I'm going to come back to solve that in a moment. Variegate darter, I'm not sure what that is, but I'm wondering if that implies some sort of mixing of the genetics. In the abstract here, we're seeing genetic integrity. Okay, so that's kind of pointing to that same problem. And here's another problem, extirpation. I don't know what that means. So let me pop over quickly to Google and ask it to define extirpation. So that's local extinction of an organism. So it's not totally extinct if it exists elsewhere, but in my case, that may be what will happen if they can't be saved in Virginia. Okay, and the other word was introgression, the transfer of genetic information from one species to another as a result of hybridization. Right, okay, so that could be the problem that is occurring for this particular fish. And I think those would be words that I will add to my list of search terms. The second one, remaining populations, I see candy darter and the genus and species. That looks good. That would be one I would want to take a look at. Third one, distributions is good, of 3 Estheastoma darters. Oh, but not the right species, I don't think. And also it says Ohio. So I would predict that this article will not have a great focus on the candy darter in Virginia. Another issue I see with this one is that it says Candy Run as the name of a place in Ohio, so not related. So to So I think I'll go ahead and pause there and we can go on to the reactions, if there are any.
Yeah, folks are calling out in chat, noticing that you were saying, "Oh, I'm wondering."
Sandy Darter. Sorry.
Yeah.
I may have to pop out and pop back in here. Yeah, go ahead, Colleen.
Yeah, so wondering, reacting to it in a kind of non-committal, just curious way, saying I'm interested in, so connecting what resonates with you, right? I think we've all seen many times over students choosing topics because I think it's what the faculty member wants to hear versus what they really would want to do. Something that concerns me, right? So a red flag, what is it in your prior knowledge that would summon that concern?
Yeah,
I
excellent.
think we might have had a volume issue. I apologize for that.
Oh,
Looking things up, saying I don't know what that means. Being able to say I don't know is, I know for those of us who work with adult learners, a challenging point, and I think for us too in our jobs. So that's a big piece of RAs. I think the vulnerability.
yeah, 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 that's great. Yeah.
So in our slide deck, we have, I know we're really short on time and there's a couple questions. We have a Padlet set up. The third part of your worksheet is a place for you to just brainstorm and ideate where you might adopt some of these routines. And there's links in the footer for places where you can get more in-depth explanations of the routines. If you do that, and if this is something you're interested in, you want to follow up, we made a public Padlet board where you can share some of your ideas for applying RA to various library instruction formats. And I know we have school and public librarians in here too, so I'm definitely curious to hear from them. There's a fairly substantial reading list included in the materials folder, and it's categorized by topics. You can dig deeper if you choose. And thanks to folks on the list and of course to everyone here for attending. We do have 3 minutes for questions. Which, okay, I will go ahead and find. Okay, from how do you approach content instructors unfamiliar with RA to help them understand your approach? Yes. Pam, you want to take this or start with this?
Well, I would just say that I make a list of activities I'm going to use and I share them, usually via email, you know, and get their reactions to that. I'll have maybe even a full lesson plan or outline with times on it, so that they can see, you know, what's going to be happening with the class. And I try to have that conversation a week or two in advance so that if there's any concerns, they have time to react. If I get an instructor who is just completely unhappy, one thing I've done in the past is write a quick outline on the screen or the board and say, these are the things that we're going to accomplish today. Yeah.
Yes, I think, you know, as librarians, we come to build these faculty relationships in so many different ways. I mean, when I started working with the instructor for Library 201, they had been privy to RA classrooms from reading classes coming in, so they had kind of like a mental schema for it and were really excited about it. But typically my approach to working with faculty when you're, you know, cold calling or trying to explain a new concept is to focus on what problems they're having in their class, where there's sites of friction, where students are struggling, where they're not seeing students come through on assignments, where they think they're being clear and the students aren't getting it. So I focus on the pain points and then try to match, of course, if reading apprenticeship is the fix for that particular issue, try to frame the messaging that way.
Mhm.
We've got 10 to 15 seconds left. Are there other questions?
There's a good one about data literacy. So how can we apply RA practices to discussions of critical data literacy? That's a really fun one, especially to do in partnership with disciplinary faculty. I'm not going to answer it in 10 seconds, but I think, I can come back in here and provide a text answer? Yeah,
you
I'll do
sure
that.
can.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Great. Well, this has been super excellent. I feel smarter, which is always a good thing when you leave a conference session. So I just want to thank Colleen and Pam for your time and sharing with us today. Thanks for the attendees and all of your interactions. It made for a really great presentation. We've got a couple social events happening this evening with the conference, so you may want to check those out. And we'll just look forward to seeing everybody back in Hoover Land tomorrow. All right. Thanks, everybody. Goodbye.
Bye.
Thanks, April. Thanks, Grace.
Thank you, Colleen. Yeah,
Thanks, Pam.
okay.